this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I am a digital marketer in life sciences. And as we hop into the episode today, I wanted to welcome my guest, Holley Miller. She is a category designer and commercial growth expert who helps life sciences companies drive reliable revenue and build market dominance through innovative strategies. And she works at Gray Matter Marketing. Welcome, Holley.
Hi, thank you, Don, so much for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here. And I feel like we've already been having fun talking, so I'm looking forward to what we might get into trouble with in this podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll cover a lot of ground. It'll be great to there aren't that many of these conversations that I get to have with like people focused on like the creative side of, sort of taking a look at businesses in our market. So for me, this will be real exciting because it'll be a good opportunity to learn a lot of things, from you in the conversation. As we get started, though, I wanted to just hear a little bit about your background and how you got involved in the life sciences industry.
Well, I always think it's an interesting story because almost anyone I've ever spoken to kind of in the life sciences space, most was kind of like a haphazard entry. And that was for myself. I always say it's either like, dumb luck or divine intervention. I'm not sure which one. But I had planned to go to law school after college and then deferred that, ended up in New York City working in advertising. And I worked on a big tobacco advertising account, which was, selling cigarettes basically. And found myself in California looking for a new job. I thought I was applying to a marketing position in a computer software company. And I went to my interview and it was with the world's first surgical robotic company. And I was just so blown away that I thought, oh my gosh, like this is the industry I have to work on. And that's literally how I got into the life sciences industry. And I feel like, again, it's been the best thing that ever happened to me.
It's got to be a lot to learn and a big shift, though, to go from tobacco to medical devices. I mean, there were probably so many more constraints. Did they have any of the other regulations for cigarettes whenever you were there?
No, I mean, to your point, like it was a different world. And I think people don't really, it served me well, I think, to really have kind of the extremes, right? You're going from like kind of unlimited, no constraints, and then you get in healthcare and it's so constrained. But I actually kind of like the challenge. I think it's, just like more fun to be more creative and more strategic and figure this out. And then it also just gives you a deeper, appreciation for like how is healthcare developed and brought to the world, and what are the constraints that regulatory bodies have given to try to make sure that people are safe and truly getting the right solutions they need to really help prolong their lives or address this situations. So it was great, to your point, but also I was with a bunch of engineers. Like I knew nothing about engineering, knew nothing about surgery. So I was kind of like the person who was asking the dumb questions, but it was great because I had a different kind of mental scaffold, which I think helped me kind of solve problems in a different way. And it was just a great experience, but a lot of learning, a lot of drinking from the fire hose.
Yeah, I can remember those early days of my career, just being almost afraid to ask questions, but at the same time, it's like I really want to know this.
Yeah.
And so I think after the first few questions started to come up, they couldn't shut me up anymore, so the doctors constantly were talking in the surgery suite and then also having to answer my questions because I'm like, I don't understand how you do this or why you do it this way or whatever. And they didn't
Well,
need to answer it, but they
yeah.
did.
And I spent a lot of time in the operating room and they were always like, Holly, don't talk to the surgeon while he's operating, but I was like, I have so many questions. I want to know what's happening.
I mean, heck, if you go into any of those orthopedic suites, I mean, anybody that's had like knee surgery, shoulder surgery, all of you know that like the first question they ask you is they roll you in the surgery suite is what kind of music do you want to listen to whenever we're doing this. So if they can do that, then they can answer a couple of questions about like, why are you doing this? I would think.
It's true. I found out a surgeon, he was doing a crossword puzzle, and I was like, "Oh, I hope I'm not his patient." He's, like, working on a four-letter word for, so and so as he's doing surgery. So
So how did your experience at Allergan and Intuitive Surgical shape your approach to marketing and category design?
well, I appreciate that. So, the first company I mentioned, was a company called Computer Motion. It ended up being acquired by Intuitive Surgical, but it was really my first introduction to what I call category design. I didn't know that's what it was at the time, but it was the premise of what is a problem that exists in the world that if you could solve would create a new place in the market, a new solution, and kind of change the outcome. So back in the day when I was first getting started, it was this idea of we had open surgery, very effective but very invasive, and laparoscopy was really just kind of coming to fruition. And so you had less invasiveness, but also you're asking surgeons to operate with chopsticks, no dexterity, no precision. And so you were kind of really forcing trade offs. And robotics was a third category that said, what if we can essentially give you the dexterity and the precision of open surgery, but basically do without, without cutting open the patient? And, it was such a crazy idea at the time. I mean, now it's been, 25 years, it's normal. Lots of surgeries are only done robotically, but at the time it was kind of a crazy idea. And I think it was a good example of how, really value is created in the world by companies who say, "There's a better way to do this," and, like, we're gonna be, we have the mission or the fortitude to pursue that and really make an exponential difference. But the real unlock for me was not everyone's going to think that your solution is the best, right? They're going to be like, "I'm fine doing open surgery. Like, I'm fine doing laparoscopy." And so the idea is uncovering, where does this really make the most sense, that you could actually have a beachhead that people would, glom onto that. And then that's kind of how you build your valuation. So in the case of Intuitive Surgical, it was the radical prostatectomy. That was a urology procedure, which really was hard to do laparoscopically because you had poor dexterity and lack of precision in a deep and narrow surgical field. So that was really where they began. And I think that was really the focus for probably 10 years. And now 25 years, call it 25 years later, they really own the soft tissue robotic surgery market. I think the market cap for Intuitive is like, I don't know, 190 billion, and the stock's up 25,000%, So it's just this idea of like, it's not an overnight success, but all these years later, there's really no one else that's challenging this category king, this category leader. And I think that category design has existed for forever, honestly, but people don't know that term in the life sciences industries. They don't think that's the case. They think it's just a better product, better clinical data. Like that's what unlocks, adoption. And it's just the farthest thing from the truth.
So let's maybe unpack that just a little bit more for somebody that, might not necessarily, fully understand still what category design is. If I hear you correctly, it sounds to me like soft tissue robotic surgery would kind of be the category design in this case. But are there other examples that you would have of quote unquote category design and what that would be?
Yeah. So two quick ones I can refer to is one is St. Jude Medical. They were a company that um, brought major innovation to the heart valve space. They weren't the first, but what they realized was like, while mechanical heart valves, were available and could be used, they weren't very good. And so instead of trying to basically improve upon the existing design, they said, what if we try a different material? We're going to take a totally different material to create a different heart valve that would last, would basically solve all the problems. So they didn't invent a new category; they redesigned the category. Just like I have an iPhone. Apple didn't invent the smartphone. They just redesigned what a smartphone should be. So in that case, St. Jude was sold for I don't know how many billions of dollars, back in the day. But like that's an example where they redesigned what a category was. A recent example might be Shockwave Medical, who I think sold for like $7 billion. Um, they took an existing technology, which was lithotripsy, which was used to break up kidney stones. And they said, what if we take this known technology by apply it in a new way to cardiovascular disease to help basically break up the plaque before patients, get their primary surgery, if you want to call it that. And so it was just this idea of these companies have all essentially solved a problem, either that people didn't know they existed or just accepted, and basically taught them a new and different way to do it. Not better, not faster, not cheaper, but a different way. And that really unlocks not just transformational benefits to patients and doctors, but from a financial perspective, it's unlocking massive, growth in revenue, market leadership, and ultimately, market cap or market valuation. So it's
Thank you
it's
for
all around us. We just don't recognize it.
right. Yeah, I just remember it was probably in my first or second year of doing the podcast. Somebody came on and we were talking about omni-channel sales as well. So similar sort of thing. It was like, well, we're gonna have to unpack this a little bit more for people that kind of aren't doing this day to day. So that's
Well, I think
helpful.
the thing that most people don't recognize is that when we want something or need something, you pick the category first, then you pick the brand. So, for instance, if I'm thirsty, I go into 7-Eleven, I pick, do I want water? Do I want an energy drink? Do I want a rehydration drink? And then you pick Gatorade or depending on what it is. And I think that's what happens in healthcare too, to figure out, do I want open surgery, robotic surgery, or laparoscopic surgery? And then you pick out, okay, which one I'm going to use. And so it's just like a hierarchy that people don't always recognize it's happening, but it does.
Right. So what was it that motivated you to found Gray Matter Marketing, and then what was the initial vision of the company?
I think probably the inspiration started when I realized that in, a very academic, science-based, data-based industry, companies just believed that if they had the best product, they would win. Basically, it would be adopted into the market, and become the standard of care. But the truth is that it's really the company that gets people to change their behavior. That's who wins. And so it's not about, outselling, outspending. It's this idea of like, how can you get someone to reject what they're currently doing and accept this new thing? And when I worked on the industry side, so at Allergan and Intuitive Surgical, I kept looking for someone that could help me do this,
Mhm.
and there wasn't anybody. So I thought, well, why don't I kind of create a new playbook for companies that have the right product, but they're trying to go to market in a way that's not going to get the reception that they're looking for. So it was more born out of a need that I had myself, that I realized other companies in the space would benefit from as well, especially because there was so much creative innovation going on and so much need in the market. And I just didn't want those two things to kind of be disconnected.
Yeah, I feel like there are. I mean, I would call out like two minimum levels of people that need to move through adoption inside of life sciences, but we all know that there are more. That's why I kind of hesitated as I was saying it. But um, the first sort of phase that I've seen, and you probably saw it on the robotic surgery side, is just you have brilliant scientists who come up with this great idea, and they're like, this is going to be the next thing, the next greatest thing that that will impact all these lives and do all these great things. And then you have, let's just take in the example of robotic surgery, the surgeons or physicians who then have to adopt that technology, and they're the kind of the first wave of people that have to be convinced that, hey, look, you should learn about this thing and understand it. But then there's also the patient side of things. And so as you're developing, you know, and working with companies, are you thinking about both sides of that? Or, I mean, just curious to unpack that as well.
Yeah, we kind of create this, I call it the behavior belief map. But we basically say like, who are all the people that are involved in this? Whether it's, if I'm buying a robot, for instance, there's a VAC committee, purchasing people at hospitals. There's the surgeons, there's the patients. So who are all the people that could potentially be impacted by that? And then I think you have to think about what's their role. So if I were to get surgery today on anything, as a patient, I'm not going to be like, "Are you using Gore suture? Doctor, like, is that the suture you're using?" Like, you don't know. But I think people would say, like, I want in the day, they were like, "I wanna go to a surgeon who's doing radical prostatectomies with robotics because I believe that's better." That's less invasive, quicker recovery, all those things. So I think it depends on what the patient's role is, whether you have to educate them or not. Typically, you do both, but it has to make sense, or there's an order for that. So I do think you need I think I talked to a CEO the other day who said, "I don't believe you can actually scale a company by educating patients." And I said, "It's just not true. It just depends on what the application is." So I think there's a long-standing belief that in healthcare, it's a B2B, not a B2C. And I think there are just some situations where you actually it's beneficial to have both in a controlled way.
Yeah, I would think whenever it comes to like at home testing and some of those sort of applications, I don't work a lot in that space, but I mean, if you were, working a lot on the at home diagnostics and things like that, there's probably much more B2C. Some of the, nutraceuticals certainly cut across the same space. But you're right. It's very much a B2B, conversation that has to end in a B2C sort of message as well. So there's somebody at some points talking to the person that's got to
Yeah.
have it
And
done.
the example I'll give you 2 examples. One is that, we had, a client that basically spent all this money educating the patient because they said, "Well, go ask your doctor for this new device." It was in the migraine treatment space, which is traditionally a pills, a drug first kind of, "Hey, take this pill. If it's not better, we'll try something else." And what we found is that the doctor would prescribe this, kind of different option, different solution because the patient asked for it. And there's a lot of research that shows that a doctor will do what a patient asks, mainly because it's a better compliance. And also, patients tend to have a better outcome. And if there's no reason, if they're medically indicated, like, we'll do it. But what we found was that the doctors then did not change their behavior and then prescribe that to other patients who maybe would have been candidates. So the idea is if you're really trying to change behavior, it can't be one-offs. They're based on a patient asking. It has to really be as a caregiver, as a, medical provider, I'm making a decision to change the way I, treat patients going from A to B. That's what actually creates the scale, not the one-off conversations that happen. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does gray matter marketing differentiate itself from other marketing firms in the life sciences sector?
So I always like to say we're not a marketing firm, even though I get marketing's in our name. But I think it's because when I started Gray Matter, I didn't really, in my mind, marketing was the idea of how do you scale commercial, growth for companies. So I feel like now my job is to teach people that marketing is something different than they think it is. So I always say we're not a marketing firm, we're actually a healthcare category design firm. And I think, when I think about it, most life sciences companies think they're launching these, groundbreaking, innovative product that the market's just going to instantly get and adopt, but it's not true, right? And so I was pulling some stats the other day, and I saw that 66% of product launches fail to hit first year revenue goals, and they actually don't like get better over time. 53% of product launches show very little or minimal clinical differentiation. So they're basically almost like an existing option that's in the market. And the third stat I saw was that 42% of startups fail because they launched a product the market basically didn't think they needed. So you kind of launch a product and the market's like, why do I need this? It's a nice to have, or I don't need it at all. And so healthcare, academy design is really about this idea of you have to launch a product that the market is conditioned to want or wired to want so that you become essentially unignorable. And the reason why this matters so much is because that category designing companies grow revenue 4 times faster and market cap 6 times faster than a traditional company, which is basically just trying to compete in existing market and chip away at the market share. Yeah. So I'd say like it's apples to oranges, but it ends up being, central to product adoption, really.
We definitely should talk about some of these stories because I sort of tell clients a similar story. So we primarily focus on like the content marketing and website side of things. And so all of our conversations seem to turn to imagine the if you were able to control social media in a way where every single time somebody signed on, you were in their face
Yeah.
in one way or another. I mean, maybe it's just passive messages that you're sending at certain
Yeah.
points in time, and other times you're more direct. And so it sounds to me like we have a lot of the same conversations with people about, hey, it this is the way that things are done, at least for now. And you've got
Yeah.
to get noticed. So yeah.
It's true, and I think people again, it's like someone, "Here's my beautiful baby," and you're like, "That's not a beautiful baby." Like, they're so invested and they're so emotional about this technology and the solution and how it's, gonna address an unmet need. It's not untrue. It's just that that alone isn't enough to get people to actually reject what they're currently doing and do something differently, and it's really comes down to what is known as brain science, which is no matter if you're a doctor or surgeon, a teenager, we all have the same human brain, and it basically operates the same way. And it functions on emotions and instincts and not data. And that drives most people in the life sciences space crazy because it's counter to what they believe, right? I mean,
Yeah, I get for some reason I want to say, and I've been through this sales material. I don't know how many times, but I want to say it's like nearly 70% of all buying decisions are done only on the emotional side.
yeah.
All of the rest of the noise that you hear and all the logic and everything that you use that should drive your decision, normally not a big part of it.
So it's funny. Our brains take that rational part, and that's how we justify our decisions. So, for instance, I just went shopping this past week, and my husband was like, "What did you buy?" I'm like, "A pair of black shoes," and he was like, "Don't you
Don't you have
already
black
have
shoes?
black shoes?" And I said, "But there was a sale. There was a sale going on," and so I was using that logic to justify by buying of the new pair of shoes. And yeah, I just wanted it. That's the truth. I just wanted this new pair of black shoes. So
Well,
yeah.
admitting it's half the battle. So there you go. Um, so let's talk a little bit. You talked a little bit about the statistics around people that can lose at this game if they sort of don't think about category marketing. As you think about this, um, how do your clients actually benefit from some of the strategies that you use?
So I think the way I kind of think about it as a stepwise fashion. So one, I think that there really needs to be internal alignment. If you're going to bring, I'd say there's two scenarios. Sorry, let me back up. If you're preparing to launch a product, then I think there needs to be internal alignment of like really like what are we going to do? Who is this for? We can't go after everybody. And maybe surprisingly not, a lot of companies don't have that alignment that they really need, at the kind of executive commercial leadership level. And so I think that's, one step. The second step, I think, is that most companies in this space have spent probably 10 years minimum, maybe 30 to $50 million minimum of, trying to bring an idea to market. And so if you look at those statistics I just shared, the odds of you being successful, those odds are against you, right? And so if you really are trying to bring your vision to life, which is what most companies are trying, they're trying to actually fix a problem, right? They're trying to improve healthcare, their delivery of healthcare. If you really want to see that come to fruition, you got to basically throw out the old playbook, and you're going to have to again figure out how are you different, not better, because that's forcing a comparison. So I love pizza. You and I could probably debate who's got the best pizza, right? Like it's subjective. I believe it's X, you believe it's Y. But if I say, do you want pizza or sushi? That forces a choice. And so the idea is you need to essentially force a choice and say, do you want robotic surgery or do you want open surgery? And then I think it's this idea of how do you deploy your resources as efficiently and as effectively as possible so that you can get that strategic foothold and figure out where do you really matter and teach the market why, what are the consequences of not making this change. And then it needs to be so obvious that then you get that adoption, then you can scale. And so I think it's this idea of maximizing your resources, maximizing the impact, and then ultimately, changing the trajectory of your company as well as the trajectory of healthcare, which is really what it's all about.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing about as well, kind of the strategies and how you apply brain science around driving these behaviors too. Because one of the things that I find, at least in terms of digital marketing, and I'll just use a quick example as well, is that if you go online and everything looks like an ad, nobody wants to see ads, right? I mean, we don't want to see ads on TV. We try and skip past them. We don't want to see ads in social media. You kind of scroll past them. However, if you all of a sudden run across something that indicates a problem that you know that you have, or can solve some sort of situation that you have, or provide deeper education, and you just use that word in your answer just a second ago, um, I oftentimes talk about the customer's journey in terms of buying, and the fact that you can't start at the finish line and say, hey, look, come buy this. And we've all seen that, and none of us fall for it. So essentially, how do you educate, and then how do you work on sort of checking off the things that people use to try and decide, buy this solution or don't buy this solution? And then at the bottom, now you can start to say, okay, now here's the right offer. There's the one that you should choose. What are some of the tools that you use at Gray Matter Marketing?
I appreciate that question because I think that again, it's when you really think about what drives adoption and revenue, it is really how fast you can get someone to change their behavior, which then gets them to use your product, right? And you're really getting them to change from using X or prescribing X to using or prescribing Y. That's gotta happen. And so how fast you can make people change their mind is how fast your company will grow and scale. And so one of the cardinal sins, if you want to call it that we see companies do time and time again is they think, well, we can't do anything in the market until we have commercial approval. That's a no-no. But the mistake is that you can condition the market about the problem they have that you plan to solve for well in advance. And most of our clients recommend doing this 12 to 18 months. And we call it problem marketing. So it's not product marketing. We're not making any claims. We're not taking orders. We're not doing anything, that would be frowned upon. But it's really, again, like inciting the market, almost like I just watched The Big Lebowski the other weekend, and it was like, I won't stand for the aggression, man. It was like, you want to kind of incite the audience that they won't stand for the status quo anymore, right? And so by the time, and it's not just this is inconvenient. It's like, this is horrible. Like, we need to be able to solve this problem because it would transform my life, patient's life, whatever, if I could fix this. So it's high stakes stuff. It's not just like, oh, I have a red pen. I'd like a blue pen. Like, it has to be, there has to be some high stakes to it. And so by spending that time educating the market and kind of getting them riled up, like, we need to fix this. When you come to market, they're already like thinking, they're looking for your solution, and you control the agenda of your category by defining the criteria. So for instance, if it's like, hey, we have a client who's bringing a product to market in the spinal fusion space, and there's 350 products that help repair bones following, a fusion surgery. And we were like, you're going to be the 351st? Like, that's a terrible, idea. But they're like, yeah, but we're going to be a little bit cheaper. And we're like, that's not a good strategy. But when we worked with them, we realized that the problem that they solved was one that no one thought was possible. So no one was looking for their solution, right? And so the thing was, if you get spinal surgery, you get hardware and screws and plates put in your spine to act as a scaffold until your bones can repair and heal and create a stable spine. But that doesn't happen until the bone actually repairs itself. And that can take up to 24 months. So 2 years, people are just waiting. And if the bone doesn't repair, you have what's called hardware failure, which means that the hardware isn't holding in your spine and you'll probably have to reoperation. So after all that time, all the pain you go through, you're gonna have to have another surgery.
Mm.
And we were like, but wait, you guys can do it in 6 months. And so you're tackling a whole other dimension, which is time, shortening the gap between surgery and fusion that people just accepted like that's showbiz, right? It's 24 months. Hope it works. And by introducing this idea of like you can actually close the surgery to fusion gap with a new category, which is wait for it, not a bone repair or sorry, a bone graft replacement. It's a bone growth accelerator. People are like, whoa, like that's I didn't think that was possible. And again, like it's just this idea of if you just say like, hey, we're the 351st product, they're gonna be like, I already have a bone repair product I use. Like,
Oh, we're
why would I
cheaper.
I'm a great surgeon. My patients get great outcomes, you know?
Mhm.
And so all of these things play into our cognitive biases in our brains and how we basically have to kind of activate um, the part of our brains that are receptive to rejecting what we believe is good and trying something new. And I think most companies, again, they don't do it because they think, well, it's so innovative, it's so great when it is available. People will just instantly recognize how amazing it is, and they'll just start adopting it. And it's just not what happens.
So you talked a little bit earlier as well. I just want to kind of come back to this because the question was also on how your approach is different, and you talked a little bit about the framework that you use as well. So does that sort of help you unpack more of these answers through time? And then I mean, because I sort of envision, I mean, at least on my side, right? I mean, I'm having to spend a fair amount of time just understanding the company, understanding what it is that they're trying to do. What is your vision, overall, and how can I help? Um,
Yeah.
and then, that we use some frameworks today, but it's not, not nearly, what I would imagine you probably have in your organization.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that because I started out this conversation telling you that I asked a lot of questions in the beginning because I didn't understand anything. I was like the playing the blonde girl, like, I'm so dumb. Answer this question. But I think it served me really well in gray matter because what that does is we kind of have a different mental scaffold that essentially says like what assumption do we believe is no longer true, meaning think about robotics. The surgeon's not even next to the patient. They're not even scrubbed in. That was crazy. So it was like, oh, we could reduce the invasiveness of surgery, but it means the surgeon doesn't have to be at the OR table. Like that was crazy. You don't have to prick your what if you don't have to prick your fingers to test your blood sugar? What if you don't have to be a patient inside the hospital to get your vitals monitored? These are all like premises that exist to be true that you can reject and say like why does it take 24 months to have your bones heal after surgery? So I think a lot of times people have either an idea or they have the technology, and we have a mental scaffold that we basically run them through to say what is the category problem that we think we can solve that for a segment they would care enough about this problem that they would change your behavior. And so the simplest way to think about it, we call it the disguster grid, which is you have 4 quadrants: delighters, nice to haves, annoyances, and disgusters. Most companies are bringing technologies and solutions to the market that are actually like more on the nice to have and delighter scale, but they're not really addressing these big wicked problems that are truly disgusters. And the example I give is airplanes. I travel a lot. And if you think about if you give me a free upgrade to business class, like that delays me. But if you cancel my flight and I can't get to my meeting, that's a disguster. And if you cancel enough of my flights, I will change airlines. And so if someone else offered me, look, you have to sit in the middle seat, but you will guarantee you will never miss a flight and a flight will never be delayed, like that's going to be enough for me to change, right? As an executive. But if I'm a college student and you cancel my flight and you give me a free voucher, like I might love that, right? Because I'm poor, I want to go visit friends, so a free flight seems amazing. So that doesn't disgust me. So understanding who is really going to be your beachhead strategic, segment to go after first is crucial. And almost I guarantee you every company that you believe is like, the market dominating, the legendary company, they all started in one area and figured out how do we then get bigger instead of trying to, be for everybody, for all people. Like it doesn't work that way. Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
Absolutely. So what are some of the most significant challenges that you faced in your career, and then how did you overcome them?
I mean, I guess I have like a goldfish brain. I'm like, I don't remember, but of course, like you gotta keep moving forward. I think the things I'll say, I think maybe both when I was on the industry side and also kind of when I after I launched Gray Matter is um again, like most companies think that data, is king and that you can just scale your revenue through more sales. And that doesn't work anymore. And so I think kind of fighting against that inertia of like we have a playbook that works, unwilling to change it. Even if the CEO is like, hey, this is what we're doing, here's why. Seeing kind of the commercial teams go off and do whatever they want to do, that's really frustrating. And I think that's where we see, the vision of companies kind of crash and burn because they can't really get that alignment. And I saw that again kind of on my own personal experience. So I think having that like internal alignment and really having it be part of the DNA is really important. And recognizing when things need to change. I think it's hard. It's hard to get companies that are especially companies that have that are led by founders, right? And co-creators, co-inventors of certain things. Like they just have such passion that they almost like kind of can't let go of the wheel enough to like see that there's a different pathway forward. So I think that's really a change. And I think sometimes I call it gravity, which is like you have a great blueprint, but then people just want to go back to the old way. It's comfortable, it's safe, and they don't realize that they're kind of, undercutting themselves. And then I think the other challenge I would say is facing is just being like in an organization that fundamentally just doesn't agree with like kind of your values, your priorities. And you're thinking like, do I want to continue to invest my time, in this, or do I want to take control of my own life and create something of value that I think would have the biggest impact? And so I think trying to make that change was maybe one of the surprises. I didn't set out to do that. It just was more of an, kind of you have a fork in a road and which one are you going to take? And sometimes making that leap, is scary, but also can unlock amazing, outcomes that you would regret if you had never done it.
I would imagine though too, in your journey with gray matter, you probably started with even a slightly different vision and have morphed throughout time. I mean, I find this in my very young organizations, and yeah, I just would love to hear more about that too.
I think the two biggest changes were when I first started Gray Matter, I was coming out of Allergan, and I had developed a reputation for driving commercial outcomes in the metabolic surgery space, and it became a really hot space. And so really like investors, companies, everyone was calling me to say like, do this for us. And in some ways, I think I maybe niched down too much because all these companies were pre-commercial. No one had revenue. They were going to need to raise more money, and just life market things happen, and like a lot of the companies didn't get that second infusion of cash that they needed to keep going. And all of a sudden, it felt like, oh my gosh, like we have no clients. So I think that was a good lesson to learn about. You need to kind of diversify or figure out what is the composition of clients that make the most sense for gray matter. So I think that was one lesson. I think the other one was that a lot of times companies would come to us because they were in market and they were not seeing the adoption they were looking for. They weren't hitting their revenue targets. The board was mad, stock price was going, tanking, and they needed kind of like a rescue plan.
Mm.
And to do category design is not, you don't just flip a switch. Like it's an intentional like marathon journey. And I think we were trying to help them, but it was almost like, it was a mismatch of timeline versus, process. And so over time, we've realized that really the companies that are best suited for market or for gray matter and for category design are companies that are getting ready to launch a new product, again, 12 to 18 months out. They could be already a commercial company and just be launching a new product. So they have revenue. Or they could be truly a startup, launching their first product. But I think that's been the biggest aha for me is like, it's not a Hail Mary turnaround plan. It's something that really you should do from the beginning because it impacts your regulatory pathway, your go-to-market plan. It affects everything. And to try to retrofit it is just really difficult.
So let's talk a little bit more about that as well. So in terms of the things that you focus on, do you only focus on medical devices? Do you also work with pharmaceutical companies? What sorts of companies do you work with?
Thanks for asking that. It comes up a lot. We just do life sciences, so nothing outside of healthcare. Because my background was in device, I think just kind of by default, we do a lot in device because we have a lot of experience in surgery and kind of devices innovations. With that said, though, we still do a lot in pharmaceuticals, diagnostics, digital health, and I think it's more of we're less tied to the sector and more tied to, are you really a category design candidate or are you thinking you're just mainly a better product? And if that's really the go, no go kind of assessment for us. But someone called me and said, like, would you help me? I'm in tech. And I said, like, we could, but we're just probably not as close to the real nuance that there's probably another company that would be better to help them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to clarify because I mean, look for any company that's out there and you're working on like the next generation cancer treatment or you're working on the next generation, um, whatever, diagnostic or whatever, you're going to face some of these battles and having somebody that knows how to unpack this or how to look at things, different and play a little bit more, multidimensional than just taking one straight path to try and get your product out there, which, look, you could take a tactical approach, but the reality is if there's a lot of change management involved, it sounds to me like your approach is very thoughtful in terms of, how people are going to think about things and how you get the mind share to come along with you.
Yeah, we say we're intellectual capitalists. Like basically we get paid to think, basically, honestly. And so, I kind of feel like um it is this idea of we're not for everybody. That's okay. I like country music and there's a group called the Brothers Osbornes and it says we're for some, we're not for everyone. And I'm like, that's us. And I think it's a little bit like dating. Like you need to make sure you're compatible. And so we're not afraid to say like, hey, we're not the right, company for you. There's a funny story. There was a company we were working with. It was those early days, and they said, "We're fine being the number 3 player." And I was like, you know, I was like, "I can't in good faith, like, so in my DNA," I was like, I can't do this. Yeah, you have the ability to be number 1 in a different category, if you just think about this differently.
Right. So can you share an example of a successful project or client that you've worked with and the impact that it had on their business?
Sure. I mean, we I guess the good news is that we're coming up almost on our 20th year. So we have a lot of companies I think that we could point to as successful. I'll use one because it's in the AI space. I feel like everyone's talking about AI right now, but this was a company that was founded on using AI for imaging interpretation. So using AI to help radiologists read like X-rays and CTs and things of that nature. And so they'd been around for a number of years and they weren't kind of getting market traction. And while AI might seem like it's a nascent space, it's actually getting quite crowded. A lot of companies are trying to enter the space. And I think most of the companies were really trying to use AI in imaging interpretation to triage patients in the emergency room. Like, how do we prioritize people that need to be seen, before other people, and kind of how do we get them through the process quicker? Or they were basically trying to help radiologists read more images faster because there's a radiologist shortage. And so our client came to us because they were very frustrated again that they thought like, hey, we have this transformative technology, but like the market doesn't get it. and they couldn't really figure out what they were doing wrong. And so we helped them go through our category design process. And we said, you can take your existing technology, but let's reframe the solution in a way that matters to radiologists and matters to hospitals. And it made their technology a must have instead of a nice to have. So it took them away from competing into really a different space. And so one of the things we say in category design is you don't basically compete in someone else's sandbox, right? Like you want to be different. So we said, don't say you're an AI product. We said what your technology does, it takes an X-ray or a CT scan and it suppresses all the bones in the vessels. And so instead of seeing this, picture, it's removing all of the stuff that's getting in the way of the radiologist seeing, does this person have a tumor? Do they have cancer? Are they responding to chemotherapy? Because it's taking away essentially all the hay in the haystack to see where that needle is, right? And so we said, don't say it's AI, say it's clear visual intelligence. So it's a new category. And you aren't trying to help your radiologist read more. You're basically helping them accurately diagnose what's happening with the patient when they need it. And because what we found through this process with them is that there is 30% of patients have a disease that gets diagnosed over 300 days after it first was showed up on an image because the radiologist didn't see it. So for a whole year, patients are basically not getting treated for a condition like cancer because the radiologist missed it. So we said, we're not talking about getting people through ER quicker. We're talking about eliminating missed diagnosis. So just the order of magnitude, is totally different. And in 1 year, after we launched this, their revenue grew by 400%, and they don't have to raise another round of capital. So it was just, again, the technology existed, the market didn't understand it. We reframed it around a problem that people cared about, and they basically put themselves in a new category, and they saw, literally almost instantaneous, pickup from the market.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
What's the greatest piece of leadership advice that you ever received?
I think I'd probably say it's don't mistake activity for results. Just being busy and doing stuff that doesn't translate to outcomes doesn't matter. I think the outcomes are basically the currency of the business world. So that's what people remember, and that's what shapes your reputation and your opportunities. So I would say, don't mistake activity for results.
Absolutely. What inspires you?
Our tagline is do what matters. And I think it's just a very simple lens to use to say, like, we want to work with with companies that are making a difference, technology that makes a difference, focus on only the business elements that matter in order to propel that forward. And then just do what matters for yourself, for your for a team. So that's just a simple kind of inspirational lens that I use, I guess. Yeah.
Excellent. What concerns you?
I think what concerns me is great technology that could transform healthcare not coming to market because CEOs are using the wrong playbook. Yeah. So I worry more of innovation stalling out because the wrong commercial strategy is being pursued.
Yeah, it's funny because my commercial strategy friends, my discussion, I feel like oftentimes turns to them when it's the war stories that I hear about is that people just start so late. I mean, they don't start early enough. I mean, and I kind of heard it in what you were saying with regards to, hey, look, we can't go out and market a product, but we can go like set the market up for the product that is to come so that people at least are aware and kind of looking for where this thing is going to serve. So
yeah, it's true. And again, it's just too important, right? We have so many issues in healthcare that have to be solved, and technology is not the limiting factor. There is technology. It's really the adoption, that's the gap, the missing link. And that's my worry that like good technology won't come to market.
So important.
Yeah.
Last question, what excites you?
Um, Professionally, I guess, or just kind of in a business world, I would say, I know it's probably overused term, but like generative AI. I honestly think it's super underhyped. I think it's the next internet. I don't think people's brains can even wrap our head around what this could unlock. And I read an interesting stat recently that said that AI is doubling capabilities every 6 to 9 months. And like that's just like this exponential math equation that I can't even like wrap my head around. But what that could, unlock, what that can make possible to me is like incredibly exciting. I have a son who's a freshman in college doing computer science. I'm thinking like, well, is he gonna have a job? Like, I don't know what people are gonna do, but I think just the capabilities to me are very, very exciting. Personally, I'm an Alabama football fan, so I'm hoping that Alabama will get our act together and do better in the upcoming um, football season. We're going to the first game against FSU, which is where my brother roots for. So it's going to be like a sibling rivalry, and I'm hoping Bama will roll. Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, so um, I I guess the one thought that I have on generative AI and kind of the future of computer science, I don't think it stops or slows from here, right? I mean, I think the one thing the one statistic that I heard recently was now the beginning programming portion of developing an IT application is 86% faster
Yeah.
because of all the coding tools now that they have that are AI capable. And then you think of how, just how much things have changed in what we can see in just a little bit of time. I mean, in 12 months, essentially. I mean, back if I had to deal with the Chat GPT of 12 months ago, I don't know what I would do. Where today, I mean, sometimes the answers that I get back are just, so amazing. So to me, the future for people who are in computer science has got to be, really exciting, for them as well.
Well, I just read a story a few weeks ago. A 14-year-old created an AI application that what was it? He was it in brain scans, heart scans? It was some, diagnostic application. It was like 98% accurate versus the real was 50%. And I was like, God, this is a 14-year-old kid that just put this thing together as a class project, which is, could have profound impacts. And so I do agree. To me, it's the scale, it's the speed. And then someone told me recently, if you treat AI like a co-founder, as a colleague, you'll get there quicker than being like, this is an idiot. Like, it gave me a dumb answer. It's like, well, you just didn't know how to like get the best out of get the example they gave was, just because you use Gordon Ramsay's knives does not make you Gordon Ramsay. It's like it's all like how do you use the knives that make you Gordon Ramsay and what you produce. And so I think it's to me, it's an exciting opportunity in terms of what could be harnessed along with this. And I think it's just like such a mind-boggling thing. We can't even understand it. Like, I mean, I remember when the internet came out, electricity came out, like all these were things like we couldn't even understand what this was going to do. And, for a lot of people, they don't recognize the before world. And I think that will be the case for, generative AI. Like there'll be a before and after, and a lot of people, they won't know the world's any other way, you know?
Absolutely. Well,
I
Holly
still,
Miller,
my first job, I was faxing still. So, I'm like,
exactly. There's an evolution that's the fact of the transformation that's that's come before us and that will come after us is amazing as well. Um,
yeah.
well, Holly Miller, I wanted to thank you for being on the Life Science Success podcast. It was great to get to talk to you a little bit more about gray matter marketing and the impact that you're having. And also, I mean, I definitely learned something today around category design. So thank you for sharing that as well.
Well, thank you for having me. It was really fun. Like I said, I feel like I could stand here and talk to you for hours. I will say, I do think most people in the life sciences space, like they just don't know about it. So if anyone wants to, contact me, I have some great tools and primers, even just if you want to nerd out and learn a little bit more, or even like try some exercises within your own company to see like, are you a category, design candidate? I'm happy to share those as well because it's kind of a fun exercise to do internally to see like, are you competing? Or are you actually, doing something different? So if anyone's interested in any of those tools, I'd be happy to share them.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I wish you all the best. Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.